get chicken in our culinary lab, we want to make sure we're using the yellow cutting board because that's for raw poultry. And we want to make sure that we are holding it nice and level so that we're not getting juice all over. So I'm going to grab my pieces of chicken, kind of getting all the juice off of it. And then again, carry this back to your lab.
Go ahead.
So when it comes to chicken, because it is a natural thing, there's no telling what size it'll be, what shape it will be, how much of things like this that I don't want to be eating are on it. So I am going to take these little pieces. Sometimes it's fat, sometimes it's tendon, sometimes it's we don't ask. So I want to make sure that I'm cutting that off. But I want to hold my food firmly and use a little bit of a sawing motion to kind of get the pieces that I don't want away from the pieces that are going to be good to eat. So I like to make like a little pile of my no and then another pile for my good. So this, I'll start with the littler pieces. Again, I'm using that claw technique where I'm kind of pushing down on my food, and that way I know exactly where it's gonna go and where the knife is gonna go. Those little pieces are already kind of bite-sized for me. But the goal is to cut my bigger piece of chicken, not just trim it, but cut it into what would be a reasonable amount for somebody to eat.
Right, because on this dish, this is not a knife and fork dish, right? This
Yes.
is like everything that's on your fork, you shouldn't have to get a knife out and cut it. So bite size, however you interpret that.
I am just cutting off anything that looks weird, anything that looks strange, anything that I don't think I would eat. Flip it over. If there seems like there is like a seam in it, then you can always cut along the seam and get a better angle to cut that strange piece out. So again, I want to cut this into more reasonable bite-sized pieces. So I am gathering my food together, and again, that claw motion. So that I am getting bite-sized pieces. Keep in mind that because it is a natural thing, there's no one way to cut a chicken. I don't know what that is, so I'm going to kind of work toward getting that out.
When you're dealing with a boneless, skinless chicken breast, one of the things I like to tell my students is that the fat that you see on it, that's not like the fat that renders down into some tender, lovely chew. Mm-hmm. It actually just gets like a rubber eraser when you cook with it. So you're trimming away any fat pieces, anything that looks like it could be a tendon, because that will just be a hard piece to chew. You're trying to get tender bits, the best parts. And so anything that's got like a really white color is probably a tendon. But also don't fight it too hard. If it's like, it looks okay and you're like, yeah, I've trimmed this down enough, you've trimmed it down enough. All right, but as you can see, you've got some pieces to discard.
I've got
but
good and I've got bad.
Yeah, but far more good came out of that than bad.
Goes in the trash. Remember, we don't put it down the sink. So this is going to go into the trash, and then I'm going to wash my hands.
Okay.
So I need a bunch of ingredients in addition to my chicken. I am going to need some onion, and that will be pre-cut for you. I'm going to need some minced garlic. So I want to take a scoop. I am not looking to get all of the liquid, just the garlic itself. I need some ginger paste. Again, I'm going to take a scoop of this and then just set that on my tray. I'm going to need a 1/4 cup of tomato paste. And this you're going to have to measure kind of like the shortening video from the first week of school, where I'm going to scoop this and put it into the corners. Make sure I don't have any air gaps or bubbles that are in there. And then just do your best to level that off.
Your butter.
I need butter in order to cook my onion. I am going to need some 1/2 and 1/2. But with this, remember I want to use a liquid measuring cup. I want to keep my eye on the line and I want to get down to it. I'm pouring slow and controlled so that I can be right up to the line. Then I need some spices. My spices can all go into 1 custard cup. I am going to need a spice blend that's called garam masala. It's very prevalent in foods from the subcontinent. So I am going to take this. I need 2 tablespoons or 2 teaspoons of this. I need a 1/2 teaspoon of my chili powder. So that's when I can scoop and just kind of scrape along the inside edge of that container. I need the same measurement of paprika. I am going to have to kind of tip this a little bit to get down in there and again scrape that off. Remember, you want full measurements or you're not going to get full flavor. 1 teaspoon of cumin. And then my salt and pepper is going to be in my kitchen.
Okay.
I am measuring my salt and pepper, but my teaspoon doesn't fit in to the salt, so I'm gonna have to do the math. I'm grabbing my 1/2 teaspoon and I am going to do my 1/2 teaspoon twice because it does fit into the container. I have a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper and that's gonna go into my spices as well. So I do wanna salt and pepper my chicken before it goes in. So I'm gonna screw the lids back on and pop open the shake part. So I wanna make sure I've got clean hands for this and not ones that have just touched the chicken. I'm gonna kind of move the chicken around with one hand and shake with the other so that I don't get these gummy or gross. So I'm gonna shake my salt and pepper onto my chicken, just kind of flip it over a little bit. This is going to be messy, but sometimes cooking is messy. I'm going to do the same thing with my salt. Salt can be harder to see, so I would shake slow so that you can see what you're doing and you're not over salting your food. Now we wash our chicken hands.
Okay.
So when we cut vegetables, we use our green cutting board. I have a clean knife because we don't want cross-contamination. So clean cutting board, clean knife. My onion has like a little paper on the edge of it. I just want to peel that off. This stem end is going to be very important and is actually going to work for us when it comes to cutting onions because it'll help hold all the food in place. So we're going to make a couple of cuts going this way. I'm going to use my claw I'm going to use the techniques of pushing food down toward the board to steady it. But I'm also going to have to hold these layers so they're not falling apart. So I've got my hand behind here, slow and controlled. I'm making some cuts, not all the way through, but just to get started onto that food. I'm going to turn it 90 degrees, and now I'm going to start cutting this way. But I'm going to have my claw so that my fingertips aren't where the knife is, as well as the ability to move back. So sometimes pushing against the knife and sometimes pushing down onto the cutting board. So gripping the food so that I'm holding it together, and then making my small cuts. Fingertips are curled back. And then I'm going to push against the knife and reposition my hand. Remember, you're not quite Gordon Ramsay yet, so there's no reason to be chopping fast. This is slow and controlled. If I feel I've got too much food building up on that side of the knife, feel free to scoot it out of the way. Resume your claw, pushing together and down into the board. Now when I get to this point, I like to kind of take my onion and turn it so that I can start cutting this way. Again, I want it nice and stable, so round food is hard to cut, but putting as much of the flat down onto the board makes a difference. I'm just picking a different angle to cut at so that I can get nice small bits of onion. No one wants a piece of onion that is huge. Once these start moving around the pan, they will be smaller pieces. Right now, they're kind of stuck together. So that is trash. I'm gonna wash my hands and move on to the pan. So I got a big skillet, so I wanna make sure I'm using a big burner. If you don't know which position it's in, go ahead and check the diagrams on the stovetop itself. When you've got the other stoves, again, some of them have bigger burners and some have littler burners. We're going to start by putting our already warm pan. This has been heating for about a minute. I'm going to put my margarine in the pan. Margarine is like a butter. I'm going to let that melt a little bit. And then I'm going to put my onions in. I'm bringing the cutting board all the way over and scraping them away from me. I don't want to be pulling it toward myself because then it could splash right at me. Remember, knives go at the side of the sink so they're not down in the sink for the person to wash.
I know, the burners are so crooked.
I want to move these onions around. This is called a sweat. Sometimes it's called a saute. But think about what happens to you when you sweat. You give off moisture. Our onions will be giving off moisture. It definitely is going to smell. You definitely smell when you're sweating. But we want to cook these till it's called translucent so we can see through it a little bit. So we don't want that bright white that our onion just was. It is going to absorb a little bit of that margarine, so it's going to give it a little bit of a yellow tint. But we want these to cook for a couple of minutes.
You know, something that we haven't had a chance to talk about with pan cooking yet is mise en place. Right?
Okay.
So one of the things that we've done here is gotten everything in its place. When you're working with a hot pan and you are working with a recipe that you're reading the steps as you go along, having everything close by, measured and ready, and then you know if you forgot something, if it's still on the tray, that is called mise en place. It's everything in its place. And so we can guarantee that everything will go in if it's all right there for us, instead of going and grabbing one ingredient at a time. Okay.
So those have started to get a little brown on some of the edges, and they're definitely a little bit more see-through, not that bright white that they just were. My next step is to add my garlic and my ginger. Now these are going to cook a little faster, so we don't want them in as long as the onion. I'm just giving it a little bit of a stir so that it doesn't burn. The recipe calls for 30 seconds, and then I put in my chicken. I'm gonna bring the board once again right over and put my chicken right in. Now chicken is not like beef or hamburger where it could be served kind of raw in the middle. We want chicken to be cooked very, very thoroughly. So right now it is kind of a pink color. We're looking to get it that white color. We want it to be that white color on all sides. So I'm just trying to flip it over to get that contact with the hot side of the pan. So I'll give it a minute there, and then stir it again. So my spices are going to go in. And I don't want to lose any of that tomato paste. So I want to make sure I'm scraping that out. Plus then the person who's doing dishes is not going to be mad at me for leaving a bunch of food behind. Once you put the heat to those spices, you're really going to smell it. Now, if you get where it kind of looks like it's burning to the bottom of your pan, there's two things that are kind of going on. Yes, the food is sticking to that. We're going to use our heavy cream to get those flavors off the bottom. But if it's burning a lot or it's really, really black, you've got to dial back your heat. So that's where always watching makes a difference.
If your pan is super hot and you feel like it's okay, things are getting too dark, I've got to move it off of the burner for a moment.
Yes, so just
slide it to a cool burner or slide it over.
And take it partially off or all the way off.
Right. That will also help if you feel like, oh, the pan's got away from me a little bit and it's too hot.
So pour the heavy cream in. And we definitely want to give this a little bit of a stir. So as the cream goes ahead and picks up all of those flavors and all of those spices, it'll go from looking like a bright white to like a pink. So I am using my spoon to kind of rub to the bottom of the pan and get those spices that were cooked down onto the pan to get those to come off. This is making the sauce, and the sauce is what's going to be so great over the top of your rice. Okay. So this is now gone to like a pink or brown sauce. And what I always like to kind of check, if you see that stripe, all of those spices that look like they were going to be irretrievably stuck to the bottom, they're now absorbed up into this sauce. Again, your dishwasher is going to be happy about that, as well as the fact that you're not losing all that flavor. So you've got this beautiful, thick sauce that's going to taste wonderful over your rice. You need to let this simmer for, and the simmering is like that bubbling, for another couple of minutes. It's 6 to 8 in total. Then serve it warm over your rice.
Okay.
All right, so this is what it's going to look like after our 6 to 8 minutes. That sauce has gotten thicker, and now it is ready to eat.